Hello, my name is Andy Pattee. I'm the superintendent from the Cedar Falls Community School District. We're very excited to bring to you this episode of Parent University. Parent University is a program of the Cedar Falls School District really to focus on some of the aspects that are ongoing throughout our district and throughout our community. This episode, we're going to spend time talking and informing our community about the upcoming high school facility bond and some of the needs within our current high school facilities. And we're very honored to have three great members of our community here to talk with us and walk through some of this information. We have Brad Leeper from Envision Architecture. Thank you for being here, Brad. Brian Sanderman from Envision Architecture, both of them part of the design team and the process. Not only across Cedar Falls, but across the state, across the entire Midwest. So we appreciate that. And finally, Jerry Gallagher from the Donovan Group, working through communication and other components. And we appreciate everybody being here. So we know high school has been a discussion point for multiple years in our community, and certainly something that we know is something as we focus on in the future, we want to have input and have gone through a process that's been pretty lengthy. So Brad and Brian, could you talk a little bit about some of the discovery processes that we undertook to try to get some background information?
Sure, we have been talking about this a long time,
Yeah.
and we got real serious about it here about 18 months ago.
Yep.
And wanted to talk about what's right for Cedar Falls and really get to the why of what we want to do. So we implemented a process of Insight Week where we wanted to get to more than just talking about a new version of today. We wanted to talk about very broadly kind of why we're going to do what we're doing, and then get to a strategy of what that looks like, and then getting to some implementation of how we kind of get that down the road here.
I really enjoyed that process. So it was 4 full days, really to focus on getting dialogue from community members, community leaders, students and staff members, individuals from UNI and Hawkeye Community College. And it was a wide range of individuals that we received feedback from. One of the things too was the staff survey that we did to be able to get some ideas and feedback from some of our staff. And some of these are hard to see, but really insightful when it talks about the space that we currently have stops some of the innovative practices that we would hope to be able to have and showcase and do. And I thought that was extremely, extremely powerful. During these 4 days, it seemed like there was a great deal of consistency on kind of some main themes that came out from our parents, from our community, from our staff, from our students. Can you maybe talk about those 4 main themes, drivers?
Sure. One of them we talked about was diversity, just the diversity of spaces.
Yeah.
And you know, really over that time period, we met with over 250 people in the community. We were there for 4 days, and we talked very broadly about what's right for Cedar Falls and into the future. And so a diversity of kinds of spaces and how learning happens was important. We talked about kind of community engagement and co-location. You know, how does learning happening in multiple kinds of spaces? Yep. So those things are really, really important as we move forward here.
And the one thing on there, the other driver was the connectedness, and really all those things start to relate to each other, and really connecting to the community, connecting to all those members and business partners out there was an important theme as well that came through as we talked to all those groups.
And we have so many examples of that throughout our community, but our current high school lacks the capacity, the ability really to have spaces that are inviting, that allow our community, our businesses, some of our students and the amenities we have in our community to come to a location to best serve our students and their needs.
Yeah, as we look at the existing building, you know, it has a lot of the same kinds of spaces.
It does.
And it really limits some of the things that we heard from the community in terms of what is really important in the future of education and what that looks like down the road here. So
exactly. We've gathered a lot of feedback from multiple different groups, and it's been very exciting to be able to see that feedback, understand what that feedback comes from and looks like. Jerry, you've been in the building, in the current building, multiple times in multiple different ways. Can you talk about a few of the items maybe that you have seen in around the building, some of the communication components that we've tried to look at and help people understand some of those areas?
I can tell you what I have seen, and I've seen parking is at a premium. Spots are really hard to come by.
Yeah.
I mean, we just talked as a group here about how the community has identified the high school facility as a meeting place. And I've been to a number of ball games, fine arts performances, and it is difficult to access the building. I've been to many high schools over the years, and in my current role with the Donovan Group, I'm in high school buildings every single week. And I can tell you, for a high school this size, the limited access to parking is something that is incomparable here to any other building that I've been in for a school this size. It is a maze. There's an incredible amount of parking off-site in residential streets that make it very difficult for the elderly, for families with young children to be able to access the building. That is one of the main components that I see as a need with this high school.
And that's part of one of the key principles that we have explored, and we've heard from multiple constituents, community members, as you look at the key principles. And when we talk safety and security, a lot of times it's the internal safety and security that we discuss and talk about, the dozens of doors that are open throughout the day because of the 13 additions to the site, but the parking and access is part of that safety and security because it's very challenging. We have a video we'll show here in a bit that has a drone view that really shows how challenging it can be for students, community members, parents, staff members to gain access to that site in a safe manner. We know that there's multiple ways to enhance safety, and these are some of the aspects that we always consider and explore, but certainly know can be enhanced with a new building, which is extremely important. And I think the other one, as we look at the facility planning, is the capacity, which is the next slide. And we are growing. We're growing as a district, and that's exciting because we've grown by more than 1,000 students over the course of the last 10 to 11 years, and we anticipate having that growth over the course of the next decade as well. I think it's important, though, when people start asking about capacity and challenges, sometimes they look back at a building and look back at the size of a structure. Can you talk a little bit about how has education changed over the course of the last 30 to 40 years as you've seen it as a design team and in the business of schools?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, Cedar Falls has changed a lot.
Yes, it has.
And the pace of change in our world makes some people uncomfortable in terms of it moving too fast and some too slow. But what we know is that what we need to know every day, I don't have my phone with me, but there's a lot of information on these little devices that we carry around with us every day. And so, what does it mean for education when, we can access any information at any time, anywhere? And what that means, what we found, is we need to better understand what we do with that information. And so what that means to us is, and means to facilities, is that we need to create those spaces for collaboration, for what we do with information, whether it's project-based learning or collaborative kind of learning. Those things are really important, and those spaces look different than what we have today, which is very much a 30 kids sitting, facing the front of the room, listening to one instructor, who at one time was the source of all information besides the books that they had. And we have so many more resources today that means that these school spaces that we're designing look very, very different.
Isn't there is a very key statistic too that as a group I know that we've talked about that I don't know that the public at large has heard a lot about, and that is that currently 19% of the high school is used for programming that was non-existent years ago. So some of that, Dr. Petit, is by law that the school district is required to have this facility used for purposes that was unintended, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And you see that right there. And from a communication standpoint, part of what we're trying to accomplish here is obviously you want to be transparent. And we are as transparent as you can be in identifying the questions that folks have and getting these answered. And that is one of the questions, and Brad, you just touched on it, that people want to know, well, I grew up here and I went to the high school years ago, and perhaps my class might have been a little bit bigger, so why is it a need? Well, the need is that the needs of education have changed, and that slide right there really identifies some of that.
I think it's interesting to note that 1953 was the original building construction. And
Correct.
if we think about things that were invented then, I mean, that was the year polio was, a vaccine was created.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, lose track of time and how change impacts us over time. But if we think back on that, a lot has happened, including technology and a lot of other pieces.
And a lot of those components, the original building with now 13 additions was really designed in that era of industrial revolution still, and the concept of seats and rows. And when we talk to employers now, when we ask what skills do students need to have as they come out of high school, they have to be critical thinkers. They have to be collaborative in nature. They have to be able to be good communicators and working with a cross-section of all people. And working in seats and rows doesn't provide that. You need those flexible spaces that allow and accommodate for those skill sets, and that's important.
It's also important to note that, at those peak times that Jerry mentioned, in the 1970s, we might have had 1,500 kids in the building, but what that looked like was over 36 kids per classroom.
Yes.
And that was very much a sit and get kind of style of information gathering. And that has changed. Not to mention that I think if you went back at that time, people would say it was not an ideal learning environment and we were making do with what we had.
That's exactly
And
right.
we really want to look to the future in this process.
And we all know learners have, and how we've looked at learners in the last 10, 20 years, is really trying to look at how students take in information. And it's a lot different than that sit mode, and in providing different types of spaces out there available to the teachers to let their students go out and work independently, work in small groups, versus being stuck in those rows lets those different types of learning aptitudes work for different types of students and use those different spaces.
We go by skill, student by student. We expect every student to learn at high levels, but every student has different learning styles, different ways that they absorb information, share information, or show how they've learned that information. So that's important to be able to have that process. I think one of the other slides that we have here too, just going back to capacity, is people will sometimes say, as we talk about enrollment, well, enrollment has increased and you anticipate it to grow into the future. How do we know that's going to take place? And we always go back then to look at our history. And over the last 10 years, and this does not include this past year of 110 student growth, we've increased about 20% in Cedar Falls, 18th largest in the state of Iowa. So it's really important to understand that context, that we are growing as a community, which is very exciting. The next couple pieces of information really are talking about the existing site and what we discovered as we went through that existing site of our current high school there on Division Street. And maybe Brad or Brian, can you talk a little bit about that discovery process and what we found out from the existing site?
Well, I think what Jerry touched on to start with, one of the big thing is parking. Even the parking lot that's shown on this diagram wasn't constructed until, I think, 2004. Right. So parking has always been a challenge here. And that lot is very small and only has the capacity for a certain amount of students. And as Jerry said, the rest filter through into the residential areas. The other thing, you can see the site at 17 acres as it stands today is currently pretty maxed out. So if we were to look at doing additional additions onto the building, they take over parking. They take over other things that are already challenges with our site today. So if we did add on here to this site and onto this building, I think it would hamstring the district's potential to grow the building in the future. So those are things that were looked at as we were evaluating the existing building and site constraints.
Yeah, the district is growing, so we want to plan for that. We want to be good stewards of community's dollars, and we can obtain additional land here, but it's very expensive as well. So we did some quick math on it, and we're really looking at, by the time we purchase houses, and no one wants to purchase houses and tear them down, but that's the option here on this property. And you're really talking about $1.5 million an acre to develop land, which is quite a bit more than the property on the outskirts. And the reality is that we have 17 acres here. Current modern day standards would say that we want 50 acres or more for a site like this for a high school.
I think that's so important to note that as you look at that site and that location, just to add on 10 acres, 1.5 million per acre significantly adds a lot of dollars to that site. As we talk about size of land, and you talked about the 50 acres, there's some comparison slides because we have purchased 50 acres to the west side of UNI. This slide, and again, we'll just touch on this real quick. This is the current site and what are considered to be the certified rental properties around the current site. We know too, just as we grow as a community and potentially as we relocate the high school, a lot of those potential rental homes might be transitioned back into single-family homes and other aspects, so we think that's very exciting. But if you go to the acreage high school site planning, we have 50 acres, which is the next slide, and it shows just a comparison from other high schools recently constructed or going to be constructed here in the near future. We're on the kind of smaller end of that, 50 acres, but we do know, because of our partnership with UNI, we could be a model in the only public school, Regent University, really in the Midwest that I know of that could have a partnership, co-share, cost share, be effective and efficient with green spaces. And we know that partnership allows us to have 50 acres and use that effectively and efficiently, which I think is really, really exciting. The next slide, we looked at comparisons of 50 acres. We've looked at other sites. I don't know who would want to kind of maybe address this, but we've tried to exhaust all opportunities and options as we looked across the community as far as different options for a high school.
Yeah, so the existing high school, as we mentioned, is 17 acres. It's really not adequate as we look at the growth of the community to sustain into the future. The slide, the image on the right is the proposed site that the Cedar Falls District has purchased near UNI. And then in the middle is College Square Mall. We always get the question. I've probably gotten it 30 times in the last year. What do we think about the mall site? And the reality is that, one, it's not as big as people think it is. And two, it's very expensive. I mean, it's expensive real estate that is meant for retail, and actually there's a current development happening now to redevelop portions of the mall. So we didn't see that as a viable option long term.
Just cost prohibitive in nature, and that's another aspect. We wanted to make sure that we're investing dollars for a vision that lasts the next 50 to 70 years, and having something that meets our community needs, our economic needs as we continue to grow as a region is extremely important. The other planning component, and this is something that we hear quite frequently as well, is, well, you might build a Taj Mahal, and it's very easy to benchmark regional, statewide, Midwestern square footage sizes for buildings. And this includes cafeteria spaces, gymnasium spaces, classroom spaces, restroom spaces, all the different components of a building. And we want to find a building size for a new building that meets our needs now, meets our needs 50 years from now, with the right size, not on the large end, not on the small end that we say we wish we would have made some different decisions as we look to the future, but we want something that fits our community needs now and well into the future. Because we know we are changing as a community. Jerry, maybe can you talk a little bit about just some of the changes or some of the what you see as interesting tells about our community growth?
Well, if you look at this slide right here, and I think Brad can update us even on one piece of this, is that the community is growing. And we've touched on this a number of times here in the last 10 or 15 minutes of our discussion. But I can speak from an anecdotal standpoint in that I did not grow up here, but I went to UNI. I'm a UNI graduate, and this was 25 years ago. I moved away and came back several years ago. And I can really speak to how this community has grown and developed. And there are parts of this community that were undeveloped when I was in school here. And so you can see, and just by this graph right here, the density of the community, and where it was in 1950 to where it is today to where it could be in 70 years. But I think a key statistic is housing starts. And that really identifies how much this community has grown.
Yeah, so we just got some information this morning actually from the city, and they track housing starts. And what they're seeing is 150 to 200 new houses a year in Cedar Falls. Yep. And as they track that back over the last decade, that means almost 2,000 houses added to our community, which directly translates to kids. I mean, those are younger families generally moving into those. And so our community is growing at a great rate, and you don't always see it day to day, but as Jerry said, over time, it really adds up to some meaningful growth. We're very fortunate to have that.
Very fortunate to have that. I think the next couple of slides talk a little bit about just the importance of spaces, and the video will get to that as well, but you can just see that spaces are extremely important. Here are just some schematics, high-level pictures of what a new building could look like, could be about, and it's really focused on those engaging spaces, collaborative spaces, creativity spaces, spaces where staff and students can utilize not only project approaches, but their ability to collaborate collectively together and really have unique, innovative spaces. So as we look at how do we compare to other districts, how do we look at some of our facility needs, and what would that mean as we look at costs associated with that and what a general obligation bond could be. One of the slides here shows that we know to add on to the current high school, just as it is, with that current acreage, is a large investment because something has to be done. So if you look at trying to go apples to apples, purchase land around that current high school site, it's about 118% of building a new building. So we do know that building a new building is about $112 million. But every year we wait, it adds about $3.3 million per year. The next slide shows that when we look at asking our community, because we would ask our community for a $69.9 million general obligation bond, and that would start off at a certain tax rate, but it would go down significantly with overall growth. The next couple slides show the comparison, though. Two recent bonds in the state of Iowa. Ames is building a new high school. They had a bond for $110 million. Waukee had a bond for $117 million for a new high school, and you can see the costs associated with those. So again, we would say we would ask for a $69.9 million bond to have the same outcome, the same opportunities for our students that some of those other communities have. I think we're going to move forward pretty quickly. We're here. We did have a survey that went out that asked our community real briefly. I think the community survey with some of those slides really highlighted people know there's a need. They understand that there's something that needs to be done, and we need to make sure we invest into our community, into our schools, which is important. And we do have a video that I think is important that shares some of the voices of our staff, some of our students, and gives a little bit more context to some of the needs and challenges that we see as a district as we move forward and why this investment's important.
Something that's been on my mind a lot are all the doors and openings, and we talk about security and just that the door, it's so easy to get in, and kids are walking out in the middle of the day, in and out all the time, so I think that's a really important need to have one place where everybody goes in and can be monitored.
If you don't get here early enough and you're like already rushing late and you're kind of stressed about that, then you're not going to get a parking spot, so you're going to have to park far away, and usually it's down one of the streets like 11th Street. There's parking on one side, and the street's pretty narrow. So if a car's coming this way and a car's coming another way, it's sometimes you have to ride the curb to not get hit by the other car.
I feel so bad for the people that live around here because it's like we're always parked outside their house. We're constantly moving. They're trying to get into their driveway, and we're trying to get a decent parking spot, but like I feel really bad for them.
We've outgrown the building, and so we have teachers that have offices and closets. We actually have classrooms that were originally intended for closet space are now classroom space. What was storage space has now become classroom space. We've tried to utilize every inch we could of the building, which then doesn't leave us a whole lot of flexibility to do a lot of really neat collaborative things that we could be doing and need to be doing for our students to be successful in today's society.
You know, by the end of the day, they're just really worn out because we think like, oh, they're kids, they can suck it up, but it's really hard to learn if you're hot all day. And we are expecting them to learn difficult things. I mean, I teach college composition. We're expecting them to be able to engage their brains, create something, use research. And if you've been uncomfortable to the point of sort of exhaustion all day, that's a difficult thing to do.
It's not easy to learn when you're sweating in one classroom and then you go to your next classroom and you want 14 blankets on because it's too cold. So, I mean, that's definitely been an issue.
So some people say, I didn't have air conditioning back then and I was just fine. So I go back to, let's say, John Deere, which is a prevalent company around here. What if their argument was when they have engineers show up to their place and say, well, hey, we want to be the best company. We want to get the best engineers to come here, but we don't need air conditioning because we made it just fine early on. We don't need it now. They wouldn't be where they are today. If their whole thought process was, hey, we were doing just fine the way we were and they didn't evolve, they wouldn't be where they're at. They wouldn't be the juggernaut of farm in the farm industry they are now. And that's true of any business. They have to continually evolve. They have to continually look at what's best for their business to provide the best programming, the best experiences for their clients and for their people they work with. Us as a school district, we're in the same boat. It's not different in that. We want to do what we can to provide the best experience, the best opportunities for our students so they can be competitive in today's society.
I'm on the 3rd floor. And our projectors are mounted on the ceiling, but when anybody walks across the floor, the whole thing shakes. And so if there's a kid in class, you know, that just had this nervousness, you know, and I do the same thing, your legs shaking, literally the whole classroom shakes.
A common mindset of people that may be against us improving the facilities, or I know it's money, right, that it comes down to, and so they maybe don't want to make that investment personally. But you know, they often have the mindset of, well, if it's good enough for me, then why isn't it good enough for the next group of students that are coming through? And my kickback to that is always, well, when did you graduate? Well, good enough for you, you know, 10, 20, 30 years ago is very different than good enough now. Because this building has deteriorated in those 10 years. And I know we have improvements to the building, but it's a facade because it's oftentimes on the front side of the building, and most of our instruction, most of our classes happens on the back side of the building where most of our core classes are, some of our electives are in the older parts of the building. And so having not set foot in this building and having to navigate this building if you haven't graduated within the last 10, 20, 30 years is a very different look. And so yeah, good enough back then and good enough now. It's a different building than what it was. Even though it's the same one in a lot of areas, it doesn't operate the same way that it used to.
Technology has advanced, education has advanced, our world has advanced. And we have to keep up with that. If we want our kids to learn and we want our kids to grow, then we have to be willing to not be stuck where we were 20, 10, 30, 50 years ago. We have to be willing to move forward to meet the needs of our kids where they're at and who those kids are today that aren't the same kids that were when we were kids.
Just navigating the building, if you're in a wheelchair, if you're on crutches, or if your mobility is impaired in any sort of way, it's a tough building to navigate.
I'm not looking for empathy. I want equal opportunity. I want to be able to go through this building like any other teenager and go to my classes and be able to just sit and learn and not have to worry about all of this extra stuff. I want to be able to roll into my class, sit under my desk, and open up my book. And when the bell rings, I want to be able to just go to my next class and do it all over again. That's really what I want.
We really want to thank our guests for being on this program today. This is continuation of an ongoing conversation with our entire community. We do have a website that we would encourage anybody with additional information or would like to go to, bond.cfschools.org, to be able to have a wealth of information to be able to read and see through that on that website. Again, thank you. We very much appreciate our guests. Thanks for our community and their investment in public education, and certainly in the Cedar Falls Community School District. Thank you.